Welcome to the OnScript podcast, your home for world-class conversations on scripture and theology, where you get to meet some of the best in the field. Visit us at onscript.study. Say hello on Twitter at OnScriptPodcast and stop by our Facebook page at facebook.com/OnScript.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Matt Lynch, a co-host of the OnScript podcast with Matt Bates, Drew Johnson, Aaron Heim, and Chris Tilling. We are five, just like the Torah, or the 5 books of Psalms, or the Gospels, if you include Isaiah in there, or the feeding of the 5,000. These things are not a coincidence, and I hope you realize that there's something really special happening here. But even more special is who I have here to help introduce this episode with me, and that is Abby Lynch, to whom I am married. Hey, Abs.
Hey, Mats.
Do you want to introduce this episode?
So, today, Matt will be interviewing our good friend, Dr. Mary Hom. She's been our friend for more than a decade. She is full of life and full of love and good insights, and we really hope you enjoy her insights today.
Cool. And if you have the wherewithal, please make sure that you share this episode with your neighbors, the barista at your favorite coffee shop. You could send a copy all email about this episode to your work colleagues, or share it on your LinkedIn page or something like that. There are lots of ways to spread the word.
Pinterest.
And Pinterest. Oh yeah, good point. Put it on your Pinterest page. Good reminder. And thanks so much for all of you who support us financially. You really make this happen, so thanks so much. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the OnScript podcast. This is Matt Lynch. I'm here today with Mary Hom, who is the author of The Characterization of the Assyrians and Isaiah, and now The Characterization of an Empire, the Portrayal of the Assyrians in Kings and Chronicles. Mary's a good friend of mine, and this is her second time on the podcast, so if you've never listened to the first podcast, go back through our archives somewhere, and you'll find the previous episode where she was here. And Mary, it's really good to have you back on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
Mary, you are jet-lagged a bit right now.
Very.
Yeah. Mary has come all the way from California, so that's 8 hours different. But she's graciously agreed to do the podcast, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And you come over here periodically because you do research at Cambridge, where you did your PhD. Mm-hmm. And do you want to give our listeners maybe just a feel for the kinds of things that happen when you do research at Cambridge and the scholarly community there and what that's like?
Well, I can only speak really in terms of my own experience for biblical studies. So I want to clarify that because I think we have a very special situation. I know I'm a little biased on that, but I think we have a very special situation in Cambridge as biblical scholars, being that Tyndall House Library is there. They have on-site housing available, and with that, you have sort of a temporary community. Mm-hmm. There is, by its nature, there's a transitoriness about it because, people graduate and move on. But so often people come back. So it's good to know that you've got colleagues when you already arrive. I'll be honest, I tend to be one of the more... I am perceived as one of the more social people there. I don't know if I really am. So sometimes it's a few too many colleagues for me. Yeah. But I know that's rare. Mm-hmm. I've been to other world-class libraries in the world where you don't necessarily have that community once you step in. Mm-hmm. The library itself is also, I think, very well set up for short-term and long-term scholars whom they accept to work there. Like, you could literally just crawl to some of these books that, when I'm back in California, take hours, half a day sometimes, to drive to get to the nearest copy in the world. Whereas
why would
there.
And why would you crawl to them in particular, as opposed to walking?
Well, most of the time I do walk.
Okay, but if you're so worn out from You're on like a research binge and you can't stand up anymore. You just crawl.
When I'm on a research binge, I have so much energy. I don't crawl. But there are times people say sometimes I bounce off the walls there. But I know I'm not quite normal in that respect. I have a lot of joy with this. I have a lot of joy. But there are times when I like to be in the library late at night where there aren't many people around. It's very quiet, and just find some time to browse some books and sit on the floor. And then I actually will like maybe crawl a few feet to just the next book.
Yeah.
And just lay some books on the ground and just enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So so you're based in California and you did your PhD at Cambridge. What we didn't talk about was how you got into biblical studies. I know we covered a bit of that before on the podcast, but maybe just help our listeners out by talking about your journey into the academic study of the Bible and how that fits into the larger picture for you.
Wow, that's really interesting. I got into the academic study of the Bible pretty much out of my passion for the Bible and a sense of calling to pursue an academic education in that. Having said that, I like what our mutual seminary mentor, Matt, often would tell me, he probably told you this as well, which is that life is not a one-hurdle race. So just because God calls us to one thing doesn't mean that all the rest of your life is necessarily going to be cut out to be exactly on that path or that way. I think it's important to remember it's about relationship with God. So at that time in that season, it was clear that Cambridge was the next step, pursuing a PhD, just getting more intellectual tools, research tools, that kind of thing was important. But what got me even to that point was my love for the Bible.
Yeah. And so as you gain those tools, and I know this is probably also part of your journey at Regent as well. So Mary and I both went to graduate school at Regent College in Vancouver, and we had the same THM supervisor, Phil Long. And so there was a strong emphasis on narrative approaches to the Bible at Regent, and then you carried on in that vein at Cambridge as well. So I was thinking about the titles of your two books on the Assyrians have to do with characterization. So what is it about that concept of characterization that drew you in? And for those who aren't familiar with biblical studies, maybe you could just talk a little bit about the narrative approaches to the Bible and what that looks like in practice.
Okay, well, let's go. I'm going to go with the second question first.
Yep, sounds good.
It's a broader one.
Yeah, I hate two-part questions, and I just did that.
Great, thanks. Let me know if you want to change the first one while you're thinking about the second one. So narrative approaches to the Bible. I mean, I like to say that I'm an Old Testament Hebrew Bible narratologist, which is just a fancy way of saying I like old stories and understanding how they tick. So that's what I explore. There are many aspects to modern narratives, and in ancient Near East, there are also many aspects to narratives back then. There is a lot of overlap with what we've got today, but there's also some distinctive ways in which they structured things or communicated things, or even ways in which they perceived communication, character, the world, all that are conveyed in ways that are frankly foreign to a modern Western mind. So ancient Near Eastern narratology in general looks at these factors. And then one would branch out from that and get a little more interdisciplinary into how the culture at that time, the economic conditions, even maybe the geopolitical, social conditions, all that stuff might kind of interweave with that and have like kind of a symbiotic relationship with some of those things and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. So your recent book on the characterization of an empire brings together both narrative approaches to the Bible, but also post-colonial theory as well. So that's another piece of the puzzle for you, right?
It's more like just a bit of imperialism. It's not.
Okay.
It's not. To be fair and respectful to proper post-colonial studies, scholars, it is not a post-colonial study that I've done. It's more just a nod of respect in that direction, recognizing I've had some influence by some of their thoughts and just culling what is relevant for this book in some of the analysis.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think so. A nod in that direction is probably more than a lot of studies give, and so what does a nod to the fact that Israel was a small player in a larger world stage where powers like the Assyrians and the Babylonians are roaring around the ancient Near East? How does that affect our actual reading of the Bible?
From a minority perspective, what is the empire that is over them, that is often oppressing them? What is their perspective through their sacred texts? And with that, what do they believe is the divine's perspective of all this, and what their place is in that, what their role is in that? Does that affect their identity? What does that mean in terms of relationship to this big other? And even, is the big other, we assume it's that the empire is the big other. Is the big other always a big other? Are there times when identity mixes, or certain elements of identity mix? And then what does this mean for their relationship with God? Those are things to think about.
Sometimes, and this comes up maybe more in studies on Isaiah, which was your first book, but there is a question sometimes of the degree to which perceptions of that overlord, the Assyrian Empire, affect the Israelites' conception of their own God. So do you see that at play as well in Kings and Chronicles, where they're looking at the Assyrians and ascribing, and they have a certain perception of Assyrian power, and then wanting to counter that in some way by ascribing those same powers to Yahweh? Do you see that kind of thing happening, or is that not really the way that the characterization maybe maps onto Yahweh in Kings and Chronicles?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we see that a little more in Isaiah.
Yeah.
Even with key vocabulary that's used to describe the Assyrians suddenly, all being used to refer to Yahweh. When I'm talking about Isaiah 30, I know we're not talking about that book right now.
That's fine. Hey, we can go there.
With Kings and Chronicles, it's... I think the authors of Kings and Chronicles do have an awareness of that dynamic that you talk about, but their response to it is different. So in general, I'm generalizing here, I think it's more a case of them resisting very admirably and strongly. It's amazing actually how much they minimize the Assyrian presence. So them resisting the influence of the Assyrians, and even resisting the undeniable on the ground reality of the presence of the Assyrians in certain events.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how?
So in other words, they're proposing a different meta narrative. So
unpack that idea a little bit. That sounds so. There. So the idea is that the Assyrians are very present in the northern kingdom.
In some situations, yeah.
And the narrative basically glosses over that, or
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So I talk about that in the different chapters in this book, in what I call book number 2.
Yeah.
So that's why I talk about not only instances in which the Assyrians are explicitly in the text, but I also talk about instances in which the Assyrians would be expected to appear in the text. But they are either strongly minimized or just not present.
Yeah.
So that silence, that omission, also says something.
Yeah. So, is it because for the author of Kings, or the editor of Kings, who's typically called the Deuteronomistic historian, is it because for that historian it's categories like idolatry and the treatment of the high places that is really the lens through which they're looking at history? Or is it because, do you think they want to kind of deliberately downplay the significance of the empire? Because it's not them. That's not the reason that they had all their troubles. It's because of their own disloyalty to Yahweh in some way.
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah.
I think there is in Kings a reflective element. Obviously, it's more in Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think it's a prayerful element. So, when I say reflection, I mean, I reflect, at the end of a day.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Chronicles, I mean, when I say reflection regarding Chronicles, we're talking about years, right? It's like decades. It's like longer than that. And so with Kings, there is a reflective element. But that doesn't mean it's been like super long.
Mm-hmm. So is that a kind of resistance strategy? So
yeah. I know what you mean.
I guess like
yes, but it's almost like it's to the point where it is a resistance strategy. But when I was looking at these texts, it's like, especially the text of omission, as you may want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's to the point where they have trained their focus to be so much on Yahweh and their understanding of his purposes and his ways that they just don't see the powers that ultimately don't matter in the end as needing mention in the text.
Got it. So I see.
It's an unusual focus that is reflected by the biblical authors, but this could also be why they are the biblical authors, because they had that kind of sharp, focus,
focus on Yahweh. Yeah. So I've done research on monotheism, and I've talked before about different modes of monotheizing. One of them is by direct confrontation, and that's like you have in 2nd Isaiah, where you have all these polemics against the gods, where they're in the line of fire, and the author is attacking them mockingly. So that's one mode of monotheizing. The other mode is by omission, and by just simply ignoring them as a factor. So the first chapter in the Bible, the creation story, shows Yahweh shows the Lord creating the world, and simply doesn't mention any other deities. And the sun, moon, and stars, all these things are just facts of the created order, but they're not ascribed any powers. And so it's a kind of monotheistic world, but there's no attack on the gods because they're not even a factor in the equation.
Yeah, ancient Near Eastern mental emotional boundaries.
Okay, yeah,
right.
Yeah, I guess so. So that's interesting. So you have in
psychological boundaries,
right? So you have in Kings and Chronicles then a mode of maybe non-engagement with the empires. That's the byproduct of a clear focus on Yahweh and the issues around idolatry and injustice and so on, and then the Assyrians, just kind of like where they're needed in the story, they show up. Mm-hmm. So okay, and then
we are speaking generally. I mean, there are times when you get more of the confrontative kind of thing happening.
Right. Okay, so you've done your work on the Assyrians, the portrayal of the Assyrians in Kings and Chronicles and Isaiah. So you wrapped up that segment of your research, and then you've got another article just came out on a very different topic. So, Finger of God.
Ah, yes.
So, what's the backstory to that one?
Finger of God. So, with the Vetus Testamentum one last year, as you may recall, I thought that was going to be the shortest article I would write in my life. The Finger of God article ended up being a 3-day article, but that also includes an all-nighter. The backstory on that is I had the privilege of being part of a student Bible study at Cambridge. And we are going through the book of Luke. We are discussing Luke chapter 11, got to verse 20, and there's that reference to the finger of God. One of our participants, Mr. Patrick McClure, suggested that there was a connection between Daniel 5 and Luke 11:20. I thought he was crazy.
Wait a second. The Luke 11 finger of God reference, I'm trying to think of what that is.
Should I read it?
Yeah, sure. That would help.
So, bearing in mind...
Yeah. The finger of God has come upon you. The kingdom.
The NIV here. But if I drive out demons by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God has come to you. So, I just assumed I knew, because I had done my homework on this before Bible study, that the references, the allusions to the finger of God were going back to Exodus and Deuteronomy. That's sort of standard knowledge in New Testament studies. And when Patrick said Daniel 5, I just thought, I'm going to do the polite British thing here and just ignore him. And other people in the group were just thinking, all right, this is strange. There's no way this could be possible. But long story short, Patrick somehow managed to convince us that there could be, and very likely was, a connection. And as we looked at it more, it not only made sense, but it really opened up the text to us more. And just what's going on there with the finger of God and the imminence of this kingdom that Jesus is talking about, you know. So Daniel 5, right? You've got a kingdom that no one has imagined before in terms of its size and its power, like literally at your doorstep. So when this hand with these fingers appears, this hand of God, these fingers and all that appears, it's that signal, it's that sign. So when Jesus like makes a little reference to that sign and says, now, you know, hey, a kingdom's coming, it's that same sense of like something beyond what you could even imagine. It's like that close, that much upon you kind of thing. And man, that was just so powerful. And that came out of a Bible study. And I thought, but that's kind of strange. I don't remember seeing this in the things I read in the 11 hours that I prepped for this Bible study. So I go to Tyndale House where I can just feast on the library and I just start pulling commentaries off the shelf. And I'm like, okay, the top 10 Luke commentaries that I would like look at to find this in, I'm going to just pull them off and I'll probably find it somewhere in there. I didn't find it in the top 10. I'm like, I'll do the next 10. And then I was like, then I just started looking through just about every Luke commentary that I thought was legit. And then I was going through the articles and I was like, wow, I think we're onto something. So I was just on a drive on this. And the funny thing was, the two guys in the carols next to me at Tyndale House, they're my buddies, and they did a wise and healthy thing, which was to take their wives on vacation at that time, and they let me use their desks when they were gone. So I had two large desks to spread all these books and articles, to just kind of have my visual ways of organizing like my thoughts and what's going on here. And I was like, all right, we're just going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to do this before these guys get back from vacation, which I think is going to be in about 3 days, which is also why I pulled the all-nighter.
I don't think I've ever pulled an all-nighter.
Are you kidding me?
Before, like working on anything. Like I just can't function. Yeah, you get a kind of adrenaline rush, or yeah, how do you?
I mean, it was like 5 a.m, and
even my adrenaline runs out. I just can't do that.
It was adrenaline. Like it was 5 a.m, and I had finally finished this 3-day article, right? And I remember I walked out of Tyndale House, and I watched the sunrise, and then I spent the next 2 days recovering. So I talk about it. Is it okay if I mention this bit? We have this footnote in here at the very beginning, where we want to thank Keith Morrison and Jonathan Moo for their encouragement. So while this was what I call the 3-day article, which neither of us is a New Testament scholar ended up writing, and we're graced to be able to publish a Novum Testamentum. While it was a 3-day article, really the story goes back further than that. In particular, Mr. Morrison, Keith Morrison, was Patrick's Sunday school teacher in high school. And I just love how the seeds for Patrick's thoughts on Daniel go back to him being in Mr. Morrison's high school Sunday school class in small town Kentucky.
Yeah.
And Mr. Morrison just being faithful and taking the time to be obedient. He felt it was what God wanted him to do. So he was like, I'll be obedient in this. And I'll teach high school Sunday school class. And they did the book of Daniel, and he even wanted to, teach leadership skills to the guys and also help them have an appreciation for what goes into teaching and preparation. So he asked Patrick to lead some of the studies. So
that gave him a deeper familiarity with Daniel.
Yes.
That then years and years later paid off in giving him a sense that, hey, I know there's also a finger of God moment in the book of Daniel, that there might be a connection here, and let's explore that together.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a cool story. So Mr. Morrison, he's in Kentucky. What's he up to now?
He's still in Corbin, Kentucky right now. I asked. Right now, he works in the IT department of a financial company, still in Corbin. At the time that he was teaching that Sunday school class that Patrick was in, his formal occupation was as a technician on copier and fax machines. He has no formal biblical education. In fact, he only has a high school diploma. And yet, he was a Sunday school teacher for 10 years. He is aware of 5 young men who did enter the ministry because of their time in that class. I guess the things that came out of that, the growth that came out of that. And now that's what he's aware of too, right? He didn't even know this was coming out.
Yeah.
So, and it's just like, just this faithful call, this faithful response to the call to be obedient just in wherever God has planted you.
All right. Well, let's hear. I'd like to it'd be cool if you could share a little bit more about what you're up to now when you're not doing biblical scholarship in Tyndale House Library. So you're based in California.
I am now based in California.
Yeah. You're now based in California. So what are you up to with the rest of your time, and how do you kind of see that fitting in with your work as a scholar?
So, Matt, I'm going to go ahead and quote your son, who asked me this morning, "What is your job?" I hope it's okay if I mention this. You can go ahead and edit this out if you don't like this. Jeremy is a very curious, loquacious young chap. And he is accustomed to asking all sorts of really interesting questions to me and getting answers in conversation. So the first time he asked me, "Mary, what is your job?" I wasn't sure if he really was ready for the answer. And we were running around and trying to get places and all that too. So I thought, well, maybe I should answer this question later so I could help him unpack that. But he asked me about 3 times. And finally, he actually just put himself in front of my face and said, "What is your job?" And I said, "Most of the time, I am taking care of my mom because she's very ill." So my mom has a medically induced brain cancer. And the treatments for that have sapped a lot of her energy and her short-term memory. And they probably account for her vision complications. So my brother and I have both chosen to come back to her home and just enjoy the privilege of being with her and serving her. And I think it's okay for me to speak for my brother on this as well. I think both of us are finding and meeting God through this in humbling and in relational ways that we were kind of overdue to just grow in. We had sort of a similar experience when we chose to also come back home to help our mom take care of our grandma in hospice. It is different when it's your mom, though, you know?
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's a grandparent that
that mattered. And my next book, after book number 2, is going to be about my relationship with my grandma and some other things. But when it's your parent, there also is a difference. So,
I just remembered, I hadn't thought about this in a while. You used to have a business card that had a picture, which I really loved, and I'd never seen anyone with a business card like this. But you had, I can't remember all the elements in it, but I think there was a wheelchair in the picture on your business card, and like, was it your foot? Or I can't remember what else was on there. Yeah, your foot. Like, what was this?
I have different kinds of shoes.
Okay, yeah. And so this is...
Your wife can appreciate this.
Yeah, but I remember what I liked about that was that, well, first of all, it's a very unconventional business card.
It is.
But as a way of saying that, like, this is my work now. Not in a narrow sense, but in a broad sense of, like, this is what I'm investing in at this time. And of course, at that time, I think it was your grandmother, and now that wheelchair is your mom.
Well, she's not that bad at the wheelchair level.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
that's just, if we're traveling, it's easier.
Yeah, when
you're
traveling. Yeah. She's
traveling. I'll do the wheelchair. But most of the time, she can.
Yeah, but I think that's. I just thought that was so cool. So
okay, wait, hang on a sec. But with that,
yeah,
I don't use that card anymore. Partly because grandma's not here anymore. So I used to take my grandma out on dates.
Yeah.
Just to give her something to look forward to and have fun with. So that's why I'm in a fancy shoe, and there's like this long, silky dress that you kind of see in one corner with a wheelchair on the other end of the corner, and this fancy carpet. We were at the Crocker Art Museum. But on the back, in grayscale, is another shoe and just this pile of rubble. Well, it looks like just a pile of rubble, but that's a picture of my foot walking over the pile of rubble that was left when a church was expanding its walls to accommodate more people in a not very affluent neighborhood in Zimbabwe. So I was visiting Ray and Angela Motzi, who have their own remarkable story, just incredible. I actually wanted to interview him just because I wanted to know, what was it like when the government put you in prison 3 times after rescuing so many people that Mugabe had displaced and all that kind of thing? As you helped lead the other church pastors and, helping people find homes and all that kind of stuff. What was it like when you were in prison? And what was it like for your wife and all that kind of stuff? And he went ahead and just showed me some of the churches and introduced me to some of the people and that kind of thing. So that was on the back of the card, but it was in grayscale, so you may not have noticed that.
No, I vaguely remember that now, but it was the wheelchair in the photo that really stood out to me. But
that's more my life.
Yeah,
that is more my life. More of my life is domestic in a non-conventional way right now. Yeah, I want to add that I have a debt, I feel, to the biblical scholars and just people of Africa, of the church in the broader sense of Africa. What I've found on my visits there, as I talked with certain people who, friends would be like, well, you got to meet this person, or, this person, was involved with this or whatever kind of thing. And I'm like, wow, they're still alive. When I ask them, so what are you doing in the church now or whatever? I mean, for example, going back to the Motzis, Ray Motzi is no longer, at the time, he was no longer the senior pastor of the largest church in his city. But instead, he was the president of the theological college there. He was church planting 2 churches. He was pastoring 2 poor churches that needed an interim pastor. He was Dr. Ray Motzi, so he was also teaching. I don't think he had time to do research. And then I asked his wife, Angela, so what do you do? She's like, well, I run the chicken ministry, which, if you know Africa, chickens are a big thing. Very helpful. All sorts of things can happen when you've got chickens happening.
The chicken ministry.
The chicken ministry matters, very much so. And then, I've got this, I oversee like the prayer ministry, and then I help out with this and I help out with that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think you just listed 6 things. I was like, you do all this now? And she said, we have no choice. The needs are so great. Everyone wears multiple hats. And I said, wow, this is so different from what we have in the West. We're so encouraged to specialize. And it's assumed that you can't survive in what you're doing unless you specialize. Whereas in Africa, people have remained, they still have expertise as when they get educated, but they still are involved with multiple projects oftentimes and multiple roles, and just the whole African, I bet there's an African term for it that I can't think of right now, but the whole sense of integration, of staying integrated with the community, also just with their internal integration. I mean, for me as a Old Testament Hebrew Bible scholar, I'm really into this idea of shalom, and I feel like with Africa, it helped me just experientially appreciate this idea of shalom, because I could see that, I could feel that in how they were doing things and just being around them, and I could see the fruit of that. I remember Andrew Walls telling me before I did any Africa trip that the future of theology is in Africa and Asia. And I said, that's a really intriguing statement. Why would you say that? And he said, it's because they hadn't lost the integration with their faith. And it's just, that's a simple statement. It is very true. There's nothing like just going there and seeing it and experiencing it for yourself and stuff. So I'm partly inspired by the example that I've seen, and that I'm aware of the people there. I will probably never ever reach what they do. I mean, there's a humility to it. There's a strange ordinariness to it. There is a great worship in how they do scholarship in community and holistically. But it's beautiful and it's inspiring.
What are some of the effects of that in their scholarship? So it affects their scholarship. What does that look like?
It looks like a scholarship that tends to get expressed in terms of, words on the page, more lay-oriented writings. So people get training where they could be writing commentaries, articles, monographs, but they remain so connected with the church that they just are intent, rightly, of raising up the next generation and equipping the people. So they tend to go into teaching or pastoring, and that just takes up so much time because the need is so great. So being able to do research, it's more a time matter kind of thing. So I think it's more practical work, more just natural involvement with social issues, because social justice issues and social issues, because you can't get away from those needs in Africa. Yeah. You do get among like more formal, so to speak, biblical scholars in Africa, more research. And it's interesting because it does tend to be associated these days with, post-colonialism. It's like African hermeneutics. And I certainly do not want to deny the value of considering these perspectives. But I think even more, you get a perspective and a scholarship that, I'm speaking so generally here, that generally is more sensitive to power dynamics, to integration and disintegration, that usually more readily embraces concepts regarding the supernatural. And so it can just move on to other topics because that's already assumed by the researcher and the audience. Those so many generalisms, but yeah, you get the idea.
That's helpful.
It'd probably be better to ask an African scholar. So, my uncle Nesmus Ngundu. Yeah, I call my uncle. Get him on sometime.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mary.
You've been listening to OnScript, delectable conversations on scripture and theology. If this episode has brought you inner peace or lit your biblical fire, please consider a small donation of just $2 or $5 per month. Information on how to donate can be found at onscript.study/donate.